All right, they're joining us.
Daphne has a question.
Can you hold that question just for a moment?
Sure.
Actually, I think we could.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Phil, you're ready to go.
Daphne, if you had a quick question, go for it.
Yeah, just a technical question. Can you guys see me? I feel like my lighting is somewhat dark.
Yes, we can see you, although the light behind you is kind of overpowering. We can definitely see you. We can see your outline.
Maybe I need to move it. If I turn it off, it'll be too dark.
You're right. Yeah. Well, that's good. You know what? You're good. We can clearly see you. Well, everybody, we want to welcome you to the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Tonight we have a special program called The Color of Injustice, Being Black in America. My name is Phil Stasek. I'm the past president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance and a spokesman for the SCPA. And tonight we have 5 magnificent speakers that are going to be talking with us and exploring the issue effectively of Black Lives Matter. We know that for the past 400 years that people of color in the United States have been treated, to put it kindly, poorly, in some cases like animals. It is a situation that all of us should be aware of, and many people are not. The history of people of color in this country is one that needs to be explored, needs to be discussed, and we need to change things. So tonight, the 5 folks that we have are going to be exploring these issues all together with all of us. The first part of our meeting will be this wonderful panel discussion with our 5 speakers. Following that, we have a statement that the Space Coast Progressive Alliance has prepared, and it is co-signed by a number of like-minded allies across the Space Coast. And then we'll open the floor to you. Those of you that are here in our audience will have a chance to raise your hands and participate in our question and answer session. So we'll probably be discussing that more. We're going to break back and talk about that a little bit again as we work our way through the program. But what I'd like to do to start off will be first to do a quick introduction on our 5 speakers. First, we have Leonard Ross. He has served 22 years as president of the Dr. Martin Luther King Coalition and 7 years as president of the Melbourne Police Community Relations Council. Next is Rick Hoye. He's the chair of the Broward County Democratic Party, not to be confused with Brevard County. Remember, this is Broward County. His role in the AFL-CIO is with the Florida Future Labor Leaders, and he's a middle school teacher, so he is on the front lines of a lot of things that are happening in our community these days. Shakira Morris, who goes by Shy, is with the Atlantic Center for the Arts, longtime community artist and social justice advocate. Daphne Duret is an investigative reporter for the USA Today. And Kyla Janae Lacey, she's a spoken word artist, feminist, blacktivist, LGBT ally, budding blogger, and tree hugger. And her spoken word video on white privilege has gone viral. And so each of these 5 people will be bringing a little bit different message to the table. And during the Q&A, I encourage everyone to interact. You know, if they've got things they want to say to each other, they got things they want to say to you as the audience. And those of you in the audience, if you have a question, it'll be your chance. We're going to ask people to limit their questions to 2 minutes. So if you're thinking about asking a question, make it concise, make it sharp, and hopefully we'll get a great conversation out of that. I want to take a moment to say thanks to our Action Projects Committee here at the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Each of our events every month is put together by a team of talented volunteers, folks that work very hard to bring high-quality speakers and to examine very important issues in our community. So special thanks tonight to Karen Houston, Paul Halpern, and the rest of the Action Projects Committee. Our website has just been updated. Those of you that are longtime members, if you go to the Space Coast Progressive Alliance website, you'll see something that looks completely different. So we ask you to check that out at scpaflorida.com. Check it out. And if you wish, you can join. It's easier to join now than ever. And so take a good look at that. It looks completely different than it has for years. We're always welcoming new members. It's inexpensive to join. We're always happy to accept any contributions that you might want to throw our way, because frankly, it does take money to make this all happen. And I wanted to say as we begin this discussion that Black lives do matter. This is something, it's a simple statement. It is a statement that some people seem to have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around. But everyone in our country at some point or another has seen what's been going on to people of color in our country. It is shocking, it is angering, it is upsetting, and it does make every one of us who has compassion in our hearts, you have to stop and think, how could this possibly be? Well, I think we're going to explore that a little bit tonight. And I'm going to hand the event over right now to Leonard Ross from the Dr. Martin Luther King Coalition. Leonard, you have the floor.
Good evening to each of you. And I thank you for allowing me to share with you these few minutes. First of all, let me thank Hoye for bringing me to the attention of this program committee. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge one of the founders of your organization, a man that he and I go a long way back. We often found ourselves on the same side of an issue before the Melbourne City Council. And I'm talking about my friend Spence Gurry. He and Cammie will always be cherished by me for their support. You will soon discover that I, as a speaker, tend to tell people, or not tell people, what they want to hear, but I lean on my study and my experience to tell people what I believe to be truth, and sometimes this gets me in trouble. But I apologize and move forward. Looking at your theme for tonight's program of being Black in America, I know that I am an undeniable expert with a doctorate degree in this discipline. Allow me just a few moments to talk to you about what have led me to this conclusion. I was born and raised in the same town as the 39th President of the United States, Mr. James Earl Carter. This was an extremely segregated town of about 800 people in southwest Georgia called Plains, Georgia. At an exceedingly early age, I learned that there were restrictions on where I could go, do, or say based upon the color of my skin. I attended junior high school and high school 9 miles east of Plains in Americus, Georgia, where I was required to ride a bus past the high school where the Carters attended school because of segregation. I remind you that all public facilities were segregated in that day. In 1960, a young lady named Ella Baker, a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was disenchanted with the leadership of that organization. She believed that it was overly dominated by ministers and that more non-members needed to play a bigger role in that organization. Remember, this is the organization that the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the president. Her disenchantment led her to organize a summit at Shaw University in North Carolina, inviting mostly college students. And among those students were Julian Bond, who later became founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Marion Barry, who later became the twice-baked mayor of Washington, D.C., Jim Clyburn, who is presently serving as the majority whip of the U.S. House of Representatives. And finally, the boy from Troy, Reverend John Lewis, nicknamed such by Dr. King, who served more than 30 years in the House of Representatives. Out of this gathering came an organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, we call it SNCC, which began sit-ins, voter registration drives, and the Freedom Rides. In 1962, against my mother's wishes, I joined SNCC and began participating in its activities. In early 1963, John Lewis became president of SNCC. In late July 1963, during a mass meeting at Friendship Baptist Church in Americus, Georgia, it was decided that we would integrate the very segregated modern theater in uptown Americus. We were quickly arrested, and strangely enough, all of the boys were released. Thank God, because my mother would have killed me in my jail cell. These girls were taken away from us, and we did not know where they were, nor did their parents know where they were for 45 days. 5 of those girls were my classmates. Later, we learned that they had been held at an abandoned, snake-infested, dilapidated stockade near Leesburg, Georgia. Last year, the state of Georgia erected a permanent marker on the grounds of that stockade, which still stands today in honor of those girls, some of whom have passed away. My son and I drove up to Georgia for the ceremony. And those of you who may be interested in this story may go online and look up the Leesburg Stockade Girls. Upon my graduation, I filled out an application and maxed out the test that the post office gave, and in person delivered my application. I was told by the postmaster that they did not hire the N-word. I knew then that my future was not in my hometown, and I knew that my mother could not send me to college. And so I walked out of the post office and around the corner to the Army recruiter's office and was inducted into the United States Army on the 29th of June, 1966. And on the 12th of December, 1966, I found myself in a combat infantry unit in Vietnam trying to kill men that I had never heard of before. I served in an additional tour there from 1970 through 1971. At the end of my initial tour, I came home as a U.S. Army sergeant, having received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, believing that I was an American hero. And I could not even get breakfast at the Hasty House restaurant in Americus, Georgia. Even though I went on to serve 22 years in the United States Army, I did not give up on the post office. After completing my military career, I served in the U.S. Postal Service again for 22 years after all. When I saw the televised murder of George Floyd, who begged for his life, reminded me that there were still people around who irrationally hated the color of my skin. And I had once again been fooled. I say to each of you individually and collectively who see injustice being done, do not remain silent. If you see something, say something. 2, examine all candidates thoroughly and vote accordingly. We have enough crazy people holding office already. I ask that you do not join the crowd that is perpetuating defund the police. Instead, let us change the police. Finally, do not be offended by the phrase Black Lives Matter. We are simply saying, when Black lives matter, all lives will matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leonard. I'll tell you. Let's see if I can make that work. There we go. Leonard, thank you so much. You do deserve it, Doctor. We'll have to call you Dr. Ross. Thank you very much. Not Sergeant, but Doc. I tell you what, I really appreciate that story. And for all of those who have just joined us, you are with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, The Color of Injustice, Being Black in America program. We have 4 more speakers, and then we have an important statement to look at, and then we will open the floor to questions and answers for the last portion of our program. So again, Leonard, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Our next speaker, chair of the Broward County Democratic Party, AFL-CIO with the Florida Future Labor Leaders, middle school teacher, Rick Hoye, you have the floor.
Good evening, and thank you for having us here this evening. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I attended Detroit Public Schools and attended Wayne State University in Detroit. And I have a Master's of Science in Criminal Justice from North Southeastern University. And I'm currently studying education as a doctoral student also at NOVA. Currently, I am a social studies teacher in Broward County Public Schools, formerly a Detroit police officer and later a detention deputy sheriff here at Broward. And I think all of those things give me a unique perspective on some of what's going on in this country today. And also just as being a Black male for the past 40 years in this country. We are truly living in the new civil rights movement in America. We have lost giants in the arena of civil rights over the past year. Elijah Cummings, C.T. Vivian, and John Lewis all did great things for the advancement of not only Blacks in America, but for others on the tips of spears of oppression. I do believe that there is room for discourse in our society as it pertains to addressing racism. Our president and many of his most ardent supporters stoke the flames of injustice through intimidation, racial profiling, illegal housing practices, voter suppression, disinformation, and a general lack of empathy for Black Americans. It pains me to tell my students about best practices on how to survive encounters with law enforcement, for example, okay, who may be racist and choose to abuse their getting authority. There are many ways to make progress, and I am encouraged by a call for, and in many instances, reception of racial bias training, citizens review boards, and reallocations of resources, and hopefully more funding for new and existing programs that combat the real causes of encounters between the Black community and law enforcement agencies, both here and across the country. On the night of May 30th, I packed a bag full of towels, water, sanitizer, face masks, gloves, eye protection, and other items as I prepared to participate in a Black Lives Matter protest here in Fort Lauderdale to confront 2 things, racism and COVID-19, okay, which has brought a lot of other things to the surface. And we can circle back on that later in our discussion. But as I filled that backpack, I paused for a moment to ponder on what could have been a very bad day. And the speaking portion of our march went well, and within 30 minutes of the official end, tear gas was fired into the streets in Fort Lauderdale into a crowd of protesters after a police officer agitated the situation without cause. Activists were really risking their lives to not only participate in peaceful protests that had the potential to become violent, but the risk is still present for contracting the coronavirus. The fact that people would take to the streets during a pandemic has further exposed the need and the demand for oppressed and mistreated persons to be heard. As an educator, it is my responsibility to instill the principles of standing for what is right, even if that means taking the knee. It is my call as a former law enforcement officer to provide insight to all sides of the community and remind us that we cannot allow ourselves to be boxed into a corner of choosing one over the other. And until real commitments are made in earnest by all, our communities will continue to be disrupted by the voices of the unheard. As a union leader and activist, I'm proud of the American Federation of Labor and Congress of International Organizations, which is commonly known as the AFL-CIO, for taking a stand against racism toward Black and brown workers. And look no further than the fallout from the COVID-19 shutdowns and related problems to see some of the systemic issues that Black workers face as we deal with the fallout of this crisis from a health standpoint as well as a financial standpoint, especially as more Americans file for unemployment. And just here in Florida, our moratorium, although it was extended, it is not as helpful as some of the previously issued moratoriums toward eviction. So that is another issue that disproportionately affects Blacks. Workers, many of whom are Black, have been designated as essential during the pandemic, but these are the same people being pushed into uncomfortable life and death situations. As we look at the unrest that we experience, we hear names like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and Ahmaud Arbery, and those are only a few people on an infinite list of names that endure the worst type of violence due to the color of their skin. My mother's family is from Mississippi. She, my grandparents, uncles, aunts, and others endured and fought for their place at society's table. And I felt conflicting senses of pride and fury at the thought of Mississippi changing the state flag, okay, a long-standing symbol of racism, that in 2020 and only in the midst of this civil unrest would they consider changing that flag. But I'm mostly being pride because good people in Mississippi and other places pushed until they got one more icon of hate removed. And after all, our voices were heard because we stood up for our right to exist and to be treated with respect. One more reminder of the abuses of our past would bite the dust. The hypocrisies of this nation are on full display for the world to see, and I'm thankful for the sunshine because America must live up to its promise of liberty and justice for all. It is up to all of us to hold her accountable. And I would like to thank the Alliance for hosting us this evening, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of my fellow panelists in our upcoming discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. It's a very important perspective. And our next speaker this evening is Shariaka Morris. So Shy Morris, Atlantic Center for the Arts, again, longtime community artist and social justice advocate. Ma'am, you have the floor.
There we go. Hello, everyone. How are we doing today?
Shy, we've got you.
You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we've got you.
Thank you all for having me again. I feel very excited about being here tonight and being a part of your great panels speaking about injustice in America, which is definitely a topic that we need to have more discussions on. I also wanted to include that I am the Southeast Volusia NAACP president, and I've held that position for 3 years. For 25 years, I've been a master community builder, which means I go into marginalized communities and help source out solutions for generational issues. For 40 years, I've been an advocate for racial justice in America. And as far as Atlantic Center for the Arts is concerned, I usually don't speak under that umbrella because it gets kind of tricky. Some of the things that I could talk about that I haven't been approved to talk about. But since it's on there, we're going to talk about it. And this is how we dismantle some of those systems. So I've been a community artist for Atlantic Center for the Arts for the past 8 years. And 8 years ago, I became the first Black person to be on staff at Atlantic Center for the Arts. And they were already in existence for 40-something years, which I think is a great accomplishment. But at the same time, you know, it took 40 years to have someone that's Black to actually be on staff. I love the organization. We have a lot of things that we have to work through. And I'm happy to be the one to help everybody work through those situations. I must say, love them. But anyway, I guess I followed the directions and I answered the questions. So I'm just going to read my answers. I'm going to read the question and then read my answers. And hopefully we all can learn something, including me. So the first question was, what can white people do individually and collectively? So I said, I think white people could take some time individually to do some research about and Black history, Black stories, and the Black perspective. Not only using traditional educational tools like documentaries, biographies, and movies that help shape Black culture, but by listening openly to firsthand experiences of Black people in their surrounding communities. Also, listening to learn, understand, and not to find other stories to compare to. Like one example, I was invited to speak into a space, predominantly white, to give my life story. I gave my life story. We went into a question and answer. And at the end, a lady stood up and she said that she couldn't see how any of my story she could believe, because many of the same situations she was in that were similar to mine, but she received different results. And in no way could I make her believe that these unfortunate events weren't my fault. So of course we went back and forth. We had a question and answer between the two of us. And I really feel like in that moment, she tried to erase my personal experience. And I felt like it was my job to let her know that I would not be erased. And this was my truth, regardless to how she saw it and how she felt about it. But usually in situations like that, when I feel like I'm being attacked, my response is not to the attacker, it's to the people that are in the room, to let them see how I'm responding to the situation and how they can connect to why people respond in certain ways to try to erase the real life stories of people in our communities, which I think that we really need to pay more attention to those stories, especially those of elders that have been around for a long time working and trying to dismantle this system of injustice, and really give some validity to the work that our elders have been doing in the community. So I said, collectively, I think white people should learn together in open spaces where other non-whites can hear their experiences, which also then serves as a space for non-whites to learn. Many white groups I see are predominantly white progressive women and in the comfort of their own safe spaces. They can also offer their resources, not just financially, but physically, showing up to Black-led spaces and continue to help uplift those that are in leadership. I think a lot of spaces that I'm in, with me being the president of the NAACP, I'm also one of the leads for the Black Lives Matter peaceful protest that we've been having every Sunday since the murder of George Floyd here in New Smyrna Beach. And not surprisingly, with me being the lead, I've been the only one that's been on attack. I'm the only head Black lead, and everybody's coming for me. So, I mean, that in itself definitely shows that we, again, still have a lot of work to do. but I feel like I've been raised to be in this space, and I'm so thankful for my family and giving me a strong sense of self and strong leadership quality, and being able to respond still in a peaceful way, but still getting positive results. The second question was the difference. What's the difference between being racist and anti-racist? Which I thought was a really great question, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Only because I have different experiences from different people. So some parts of a racist is a person or system of policies and procedures that continue to not allow advancement of Black or non-white people in America. This can be done by conscious or unconscious involvement and power that has been generationally advanced from slavery and the foundation of American history. And anti-racist now seems to be trending. And so it feels good on the surface. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the fashion of how things should be instead of the functionality of what the word actually means. We could do things like writing letters to our Black audiences to support or assure the general public that our business is not in alignment with racist views. Like we saw after the George Floyd murder, a lot of different businesses came out with it and released these statements about how they were not accepting those type of racist environments, but they still continue to hold your Black or non-white employees in environments that haven't changed to encourage the same language you've expressed in your heartfelt anti-racist letter to your supporters. White allies also have the ability to shift their perspectives based on their environments. I've experienced many of my white female friends, some that I would even consider extended family, shift not to even speaking to me because of my decisions not to listen to their direction on the way that I should act, speak, and reach to become the best version of myself. And that would clearly help to organize and unify our neighboring community. Instead, these proclaimed anti-racists actually organized against me will not talk to me at all. So my takeaway is this: as long as I stay in my place where you can be comfortable with me, but when I ask the tough and rooted in questions, because I don't like to stay on the surface, I want to get to the root of what we're actually doing, I become dangerous or contentious, and you no longer want to be an ally of mine, but still claim to be anti-racist. I'm ready to move beyond the fashion of being an anti-racist and into the functionality of what the word actually means and how we can dismantle and destroy systems of oppression that have existed over 400 years, not just the past 4 years under our new leadership in America. So I guess that last question really had me thinking, because I'm in a lot of different spaces. Usually I'm the only non-white person and I'm comfortable in that environment, but I see a lot of different perspectives of people jumping on the bandwagon because, like I said, it's trending, it's the popular thing to do, but they're really not unpacking what it really means. And I really don't, I always meet people where they are because I feel like we all can learn something from each other. But at the same time, you can't claim to be anti-racist and still racist. So again, we have a lot of work to do there. And that's all I have for me. Again, I appreciate everybody for welcoming me into this group. I plan on participating any other time when you send me a Zoom meeting. I'm definitely a student of all educational forms. And thank you again.
And Shai, we are so happy to have you on board today. I tell you what a great message. And it is a very thoughtful time, isn't it? It is a time for many of us to really look into our hearts and think of what we've seen, what we've experienced across our lives. And for many, it's a time for education. So thank you so much, Shai. Our next speaker, Daphne Duret, an investigative reporter for USA Today. And I tell you what, I got a chance to do a radio interview with her the other day, and what great stories she's got. What wonderful life experience. Daphne, you have the floor.
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me. And I just want to start by thanking everyone who's talked so far. Shai Morris, thank you for what you shared. Rick Hoye, thank you. And special thanks to my elder, Dr. Sergeant Ross now. I really appreciated, as a student of history, I think more than anything, I really appreciated hearing what you had to say in your history. And as Phil said, I am a journalist. I'm an investigative reporter, and I hear people's stories for a living. So I'm in a little awkward position now, being asked to tell my story. But the perspective that I bring here tonight is one of, as a journalist and as a Black woman, and as an individual who has had the unique blessing and experience to have been for about half my life now practicing journalism while Black. And it's been a unique experience, and at times it's been a contact sport. But this is the perspective that I'll share with you all tonight. And Shai, I understand what you said before about who you're associated with and your affiliations, and wanting to make sure that what you say is reflected, that you're speaking as yourself and not for a particular organization. I work for USA Today, and I will take the words of the president of the National Association of Black Journalists, Dorothy Tucker, who said she is a journalist by profession. She is Black because she was blessed to be Black. And that's my perspective that I'm bringing today. So as a journalist, I can't advocate for any, my objectivity precludes me from advocating for a specific movement or a specific political ideology or idea, but I stand here in my truth as a Black woman. And so a Black life is my life. A Black life is the life of my father, who I remember being, a child in Chicago, and my father's retired now, but he's a surgeon by profession. So he was a Black man living in Chicago in the 1980s, driving a BMW. So I remember being a child and being pulled, watching him being pulled over in the car and having to explain why we were simply driving in a neighborhood where we were driving in. So when I became a journalist and got into covering crime and courts, and found myself in the unique position that before I moved, like I said, I'm an investigative journalist now, but I've spent the majority of my career, almost 2 decades, sitting in courtrooms in cities across this country and watching the day-to-day carryings out of the justice system, and how justice has been meted out. And this is not my opinion here. This is actually the facts from stories that my colleagues and I have researched over years and years, that we know that the justice system doesn't look the same for people who look like me and people who look like my white colleagues. So we know that, and I've seen that in real time in cities across this country. And so it is a unique experience. And before I moved into investigative reporting and I was covering the court system, one day I did a search and I tried to figure out how many other people who look like me were in the space. And I looked and I researched, all the big major newspapers in the country. And I found that there were only about a handful of reporters who were Black, who were covering the court system as a beat exclusively for a major daily publication. And so, I feel like what I've done has always been a responsibility, but at that point, I think it became even more of a unique responsibility, because even I, as a journalist, have experienced things that my colleagues haven't while covering the criminal justice system. After everything happened with George Floyd and we began to have these conversations, and I began to have more conversations with my white friends and colleagues about what it was like to be Black in America, an experience came up that I had kind of brushed aside, that I started to tell people, and almost everyone that I've told has been really shocked about this. And one of the things that I told them, and I guess I had taken it for granted until that point, was that, as I said, I've spent most of my career in courtrooms. And as part of my work, what I do oftentimes is I'll go into the courtroom to observe, hearings in a case that I'm covering. And oftentimes, in the day-to-day workings of the court, it's during a time where, there's a bunch of cases called and the judge and all the lawyers are in the courtroom and people are calling cases one by one. Well, I'm a journalist and I walk into the courtroom. I usually have my laptop with me and my notepad, getting ready to take notes on a particular case. And in my time as a journalist, at least once a year, a deputy or a bailiff in the courthouse has come to me while I've sat in the courtroom and asked me which defendant I was there to see, as if I was a relative or a girlfriend of one of the defendants that were brought into a courtroom. And none of my white colleagues have ever experienced that. I know because I asked them. It's like, hey, have this ever happened to you? Has anyone ever mistaken you for, a girlfriend or significant other of one of the defendants? And that's never happened to them. And I'm telling you, you can see me. God just blessed me to celebrate my 40th birthday, but I'm still relatively, I say that to say that this is not happening in the 1960s. This is happening in 2010, 2011, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2020 in America. These kinds of things are happening. And so, so when we talk about, Black Lives Matter, and the question that I got was, what can white allies do in terms of being supportive? Well, I would say that I think the phrase of understanding that your Black colleagues and neighbors and friends and people that you encounter on a daily basis, understanding that their lives have value is a good place to start. But I would say moving forward from that, and I had a couple of things that I kind of jotted down here just as some other people were talking. I would say that beyond the whole phrase or catchphrase of Black Lives Matter, well, Black economics matter. Black pay equity matters. Black promotions matter. I think if somebody, I don't know who's going to be listening to this call, but if you are a leader of a company, or if you have any level of influence in any industry, or whether it's political influence, the time to lean on Black people, your Black friends, your Black colleagues, is not when situations like this happens. It's not when you need somebody to come and talk for a public facing kind of event. The time to really value the Black people around you is when it's time to make decisions in boardrooms. The time to value the Black people who are around you is when it's time to put people in positions of leadership and influence. The time to really value Black people is when you're looking at your payroll and making sure that the Black people who work for your agencies are paid as equally to their white colleagues. And so, you know, it's great to say Black Lives Matter, but if Black lives are marginalized, then how much, you know, it's a slippery slope to dehumanization. And so that's what we're talking about here. That's what people are protesting about, because they feel dehumanized. But the dehumanization process doesn't just start because someone has taken someone's life. It starts because there's you know, people are marginalized with housing. People are marginalized with how much they're paid. People are marginalized with healthcare and a whole host of other issues. And I'm saying this not just as a Black woman who has experienced some of these things, but also as a journalist who has researched and also had my colleagues research and publish articles that shows that with data that these things are very real and they're happening. So as you know, I again, like I said, I don't come with any level of pessimism about this, but I do think that, you know, as I said, I'm a student of history, and some of these discussions that we're having now about the demilitarization of police, about police reform, these are the kinds of conversations that they were having even in colonial times. Back when a Black man was a criminal simply for trying to be free. Because we know that when slave catchers and slave patrollers caught slaves, they charged them with theft of their own bodies. So while we're looking, and hundreds of years later, we're still in the same place where we're kind of looking back and saying, hey, you know, what can we do? How can we reform police? So I think everybody in their various spheres of influences, you know, I go back to that cliche that we who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So my hope in all of this is that as we're discussing these things and we're looking at different ways to reform things, that America doesn't repeat the mistakes of our past. And I think if we
1 minute, Daphne.
Okay, I'm wrapping up. If we do things differently, then I think then I am hopeful that you know, that my children will grow up in a different America than I did. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphne. What a good story, and a great way to remind people that I believe it was Michael Braga who was leading the team from the Sarasota Herald Tribune. I forget the name of the paper, but the incredible research that was done. And we actually had him as a guest at the SCPA a year or two ago to explain to everyone that the facts are there, that a person of color charged with a given crime, the same as a white person, is statistically more likely to be given a harsher sentence, longer period of time in jail, a harsher treatment, simply because of the color of his or her skin. It is undeniable, and it's well documented, and that research lives today. If you ever have a doubt about it, look it up. Daphne, do you remember the name of that report?
You know what I'll do? I'll paste the link to our report in the chat if anyone's interested in looking it up. It was a 3-year project, and we looked at the many ways in which the criminal justice system in Florida is a harsher system for Black people. So I'll paste it in the chat.
Thank you.
Just a
And
reminder, though, the chat is not available until after the question and answer. So it'll come up live here in a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
And that's a reminder to those of you that have just joined us. We have completed 4 of our 5 speakers tonight, and we'll be doing we'll be looking at a letter that we'll be reading basically to our local government leaders here in Brevard County. Then we'll be going to the Q&A. So we're very, very happy to have all of you with us tonight on this special event. And our final speaker for this evening, Kyla Janae Lacey, spoken word artist, feminist, blacktivist, LGBT ally, budding blogger, tree hugger, spoken word video on white privilege has gone viral. Kyla, it's great to have you here tonight. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Hi, how are you guys? So a few things that I kind of noted is that there is this immediate need to sometimes for white people to justify how they feel about Black people. One of the things when I went viral that I noticed a lot in the comment section was you need to learn your history or you need to be educated. And there's this immediate need to disqualify someone's education simply because they are Black and they disagree with you. I have a degree in history, but it was just very interesting that people who didn't know the difference between your and you are were somehow, questioning my intelligence and how often that happens. And when we do things like that, what we're saying is that Black people don't have the capability to be as intelligent. And what does that look like? Because if you're saying that Black people are not able to be as intelligent, it has something to do with the fact that they are not as smart, right? So what are the reasons why they're not as smart? One, is it you actually think that it's an issue with their DNA, and which is inherently racist. And so people don't want to even acknowledge that that's something that they could think about. But also, if that's not how you feel, then that means you automatically recognize that there are inequities in education when it comes to Black people, that nobody wants to specifically be uneducated, or at the very least, you recognize that there is a reason why that person isn't as educated. And what is that reason? And so when people do things like that, they don't understand the inherent racism and the underlying message of what they're talking about. One of the biggest things also is that a lot of people don't talk about is how education is, how racism fuels our education system, and how separate but equal is not exactly separate but equal. Well, I'm sorry. What once was considered separate but equal is still very, very much separate but equal. It's just in a more insidious form. Whereas a lot of the times our school systems, public school systems, are based solely on property tax, even in the same counties or same districts or jurisdictions, depending on the income levels, the educations are vastly different. And so, recognizing how that is very problematic. Of course, nobody wants their schools defunded, but also recognizing that why is it fair that you are able to send your child to a school that has a better education simply because you make more money, but it's still a public institution? Why are Black kids, or why are kids of color who are indigent or, not in a socioeconomic place where they can afford their school system is the same? Why is that an issue? Why are Black children in schools that make more money or have a larger income? Why are they considered bringing the school down? When I was a little girl, I lived in Chicago, and that was one of the first things. There was a school called South Loop School, and it just opened, and they were trying to bus us past the school simply because this brand new school was built right in a white neighborhood, even though it was the closest in proximity to us. Some of us were living in public housing, and then some of us were living in deed restricted housing. So there was still a discounted price on the living arrangements, but there was a massive backlash because they found out that Black kids were going to go to this school that was brand new, and it was in a white affluent neighborhood, and just imagining that that is an issue, that you don't want children to go to a school with your children simply because their parents don't make the same amount of money issue. So it's one of the things I want to talk about. Sorry. And someone also mentioned, wealth gap. She mentioned how, money does influence a lot of things. A lot of people don't understand the necessity for reparations. We think that reparations are this immensely unattainable thing to happen, right? But at the end of the day, we saw how coronavirus, all these trillions of dollars came from nowhere. And, how those things really influence how Black people are treated and how we're unable to necessarily break some of those barriers because of how much capital really means in advancement. There, a lot of times too, one of the things I've noticed is that when there is an athlete or somebody who did come from poverty, who became a millionaire, when the athlete is, speaks out about an issue publicly, there is always this backlash, like, ungrateful athletes. And what you're saying when you're saying an athlete is ungrateful, you're saying that that athlete who worked hard, who, practiced all day, who, sacrificed a lot from themselves, slept on buses, owes you something just because you admire their work. And when you say ungrateful, that means you're indebted to them. They're indebted to you. And a lot of times white people feel like because we don't live in this African bush, this mythical African bush, as if Africa is completely, as a continent, backwards, that we should be grateful to be here, that we should be grateful for less oppression, because there are parts of Africa that are destitute, absolutely. But the reason why those parts of Africa are destitute is because of colonization. So there is this inherent saying, like, if I'm not oppressing you as much over here, so you should be happier. Saying like, go back to Africa. What does that mean for a group of immigrants, to tell another group of stolen people to go back to where you came from? It means we no longer have a use for you. You're no longer important. You no longer matter. And I think a lot of people don't understand, that people are allowed to talk about their oppression. People are allowed to be angry about their oppression. There's this immediate need sometimes for white people to try to separate themselves from the oppression, and when a lot of times when we talk about racism, white people become uncomfortable and the race and the conversation stops, but the racism doesn't. There is no way to fix something that is dangerous, that is, painful, that isn't going to cause some sort of discomfort in the process. And so a lot of times white people put their fears and their hurt feelings in front of the real issue of what the oppression is. One of the things I've noticed too is, I think, because I grew up in halfway in Chicago, and then I moved to a very, very racially homogenous area of Central Florida. And I was, for the most part, growing up, I was one of one or two Blacks. And there was a lot of discounting my intelligence. There was a lot of watching other people get opportunities. There was a lot of microaggressions. And one of the things too is that there's this immediate need to separate oneself, because I don't say the N-word, then I'm not racist. Or because I have Black friends, that means that I can't be racist. Your proximity to an individual does not represent how you feel about people as a whole. People are very good at compartmentalizing. People are very good at saying what they like over here as an exception. people make exceptions to things every single day. People make exceptions in their religion. People do one thing in the religion and completely ignore other rules that don't benefit them. And so when we say those things, we're not acknowledging that we have the opportunity to be racist. We have, because people are so afraid of being the monster under the bed. And that goes both ways. I mean, there are people of color with certain privileges. There are Black men with certain privileges who are afraid to acknowledge their possibility for being oppressive because of the fact that no one wants to be that person. Nobody wants to be that person that is offensive. And so we're so quick to be worried about being offensive more than we're worried about what is actually offensive. A lot of times too, is you'll see there be this praise of, you know, right-wing Black people who completely demolish the narrative that many educated Black people have stated, that this is my experience. This is who I am. This is what occurs to me. And there's so many times, there's thousands, millions even, of educated Black people who are saying that this is my experience. It's negative, it's dehumanizing, and it doesn't make me feel like a person. It doesn't feel good to me, and I don't want it anymore. But then they'll find 4, you know, Candace Owens or Christian Walkers or whomever, they'll find 4 Black people who make them feel good about their racism, who make them feel good about their negative attitudes towards other Black people, and separate them from the act of being racist because I respect this Black person. I respect this particular Black person because this particular Black person allows me to feel the things that are bad without feeling bad about them. And so that's what a lot of times I see that white people do when it comes to situations concerning race. A friend of mine happens to be white, actually. She said, I was gonna recognize you as a whole human, but you broke a window to get my attention. And, you know, for me, that speaks so much because there's this need to also disqualify protests because there is looting involved, you know, or there is some destruction of property involved. When people are more worried about $1 million companies that may have lost some revenue because that they can replace during insurance, then they are the reason why people are upset, the reason why people are rioting. And a lot of times we disqualify entire movements because of small things we see on television. But when white kids riot and loot for basketball games or Keene State or, you know, pumpkin riots, those things are revelry. Those things are okay. Those things, for some reason, rioting or looting or protesting over a basketball game is somehow more important than doing that because another Black person was injured. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes here. And I wrote in cursive today. Okay. Also, there is a lot of times too, people want to tone check the anger or the perceived anger of Black people, especially Black women. A lot of times there are times when Black women are literally minding their business and are not angry at all. And there is this immediate need to paint them as aggressive in order to calm them down ahead of time, which is so dehumanizing because at the end of the day, we all are given the right to be angry. It is an emotion that is granted to every single person on this earth. But for some reason, when there is an inkling that Black women may be angry, there is this immediate recoil. There's this immediate need to tame her. And honestly, when you have been silenced for centuries, you may have an issue with volume control, and that's okay. But I think, you know, there is something to be said about the weaponization of Black women's anger, you know, how we are not allowed to have it and how it is a danger to everybody. There is a weaponization of, and I often wonder if it's something so inherent, you know, because I do think that there are people who genuinely do things and are not knowledgeable of them. But I also wonder how sometimes things are so perfected in the right time and space, how you could not be aware of how dangerous that is. Ironically, my mother's name is Karen. And one of the things, like, we often, talk about more now than anything, is how white women have been weaponizing their emotions. I actually went to get a check once from my agents, and I was sitting in the lobby, and my name was spelled incorrectly on the check, and the check was wrong because I had worked overtime on a shoot. And so I said to the receptionist, I said, my check is wrong. So she took the check back into the building, and she because I was in the waiting room. So she took it back into the main office, and she said her check is wrong. Okay, so first of all, it was a couple $100s. It wasn't like $5 or $10. It was it was a good bill. And secondly, it was so interesting how my want for what was mine, that I'd earned, that I'd worked for, was somehow an inconvenience to her. It wasn't costing her anything. It wasn't, coming out of her pockets, but it was an immediate inconvenience for her. So,
1 minute.
Go ahead.
1 minute, Kyla.
Okay. So she came back in the door, and I said, I heard everything that you said. I could hear, it was, and so she never responded. And so she went back in the building, and she said she heard me. So her boss came out and was like, but I heard her, you know what, don't worry about it. Just, you stay in here. I'll go and handle her. And it was just so, like, how do we get here? And so that's one of the things that is very problematic when it comes to discussing race relations, is how Black women are not allowed their anger and white women are allowed to weaponize theirs. So that's going to wrap up my time now.
Well, thank you so much, Kyla. And thanks to all of our speakers. I'll tell you what an interesting little road that we've gone down. This interesting, each person brings something different to this table. And in just a few moments, all of you that are on the call will have a chance to ask questions and share your thoughts. But before we get to that, we have an important message. Now, again, this letter was written by the Space Coast Progressive Alliance and is signed off on by a fairly long list of local organizations here on the Space Coast in Broward County, and I'll give that list here in just a minute. But this is the message that we would like to put out. Dear mayors, city managers, chiefs of police, county commissioners, and Broward County Sheriff, for weeks, people have been protesting in cities across the U.S., demanding justice for George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and the countless other African-American people who have been killed by police in recent weeks. Over the time of the protests, videos emerged of attacks on protesters at the hands of law enforcement in several cities across our state, including Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. We have also heard reports of hundreds of peaceful protesters being arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. These dramatic protests reflect widespread desire for improved policing, as well as just, fair, and humane solutions to many of our society's problems. As problem solvers, we have the confidence in you making the right decisions, and we want to work with you to enact real change, real improvements for all of the citizens of Broward County. The current status. Police have been tasked with protecting power and privilege by exerting social control over Black people. Black communities in the United States live under a persistent fear of being killed by the police. Racist history is the broken foundation that our modern policing institution is grounded in. Unfortunately, the epidemic of police violence in this country is not just an issue of, quote, bad apples, unquote. Black people should not have to live in fear of being shot and killed by the police. The underlying problem with policing isn't the lack of training in procedures. The core issue at the heart of our broken policing institution is the broadening of the scope and responsibilities that are given to law enforcement agencies, which has led to the unlawful use of excessive force and the killing of Black people. We stand in solidarity with the people of Minneapolis, Louisville, Tallahassee, Atlanta, and all the communities reeling around the world from the murders of Black people by police. We will not rest until there is an end to racist policing. Our country has been overfinancing an unchecked institution and has failed to provide meaningful avenues for African American communities to seek justice and accountability. We demand bolder new approaches if we are to solve this decades-old problem. We did not create this problem, but working together as a community of goodwill, we can solve it. Policy change goals, protests, safeguard constitutional rights by supporting protesters' rights to protest and protecting the vital role of the media and legal observers in covering such protests. Commit to not arrest or immediately release protesters. Limit use of force. Restrict deadly force to be authorized only when strictly necessary to protect life after all other reasonable alternatives are exhausted, including the use of de-escalation and non-lethal force techniques. Require police departments to report and publish online data on all uses of force, including when officers point guns at people, as well as any misconduct complaints and disciplinary consequences resulting from these incidents. Require officers to use de-escalation techniques and set a defined review process. Ban officers from using chokeholds, strangleholds, or any other neck restraints. Establish an early intervention system that identifies officers with high rates of use of force, racial disparities, and misconduct complaints, and intervenes to address these practices up to and including through termination. Require police departments to pay misconduct settlements from their own budgets rather than taking this money from programs that support communities. Commit to not accept and remove from local budgets any federal funds to purchase military equipment. Independent investigations. Require genuinely independent investigations and prosecutions of police officers for misconduct. Community oversight. Establish empowered community oversight structures to hold police accountable and help establish and review police department policy. Campaign contributions. Pledge to not accept any political contributions or donations from organizations or unions directly representing police officers if the organizations or union oppose reducing the size, power, or budget of police forces. Body cameras. Pledge to establish policies governing the use of body cameras that ensure public access to footage. Require officers to record while on duty, including specific disciplinary consequences for violations, and prohibits the cameras from being used with biometric scanning and other surveillance techniques. Require departments to release videos of officer-involved shootings and interactions that result in death. Training. Commit to and fund community-led training that teach police how to treat communities with dignity and respect. Expand training in police de-escalation, limiting use of force, anti-bias, and crisis intervention. Hiring. Mandate that all history of use of force and or misconduct of officers from previous employers be made available before hiring. If so found, do not hire. The undersigned organizations appreciate the latest communication efforts exerted by all local cities in Broward County. We look forward to establishing a community oversight committee committed to working with you to improve our law enforcement services and creating a more fair, just, and healthy community for all. Now, that is signed by the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Cultural Complex Incorporated, the North Brevard NAACP, the ACLU Brevard Chapter, Brevard Now, NAACP South Brevard, the National Congress of Black Women, Interfaith United, Advent Lutheran Church, Melbourne, Florida, Temple Beth Shalom, Islamic Society of Brevard County, the Christian Shiloh Center, Temple Beth Israel, Eastminster Presbyterian Church, the First United Methodist Church of Melbourne, Baha'i Center of Brevard County, Brevard Peacekeepers, and the BLM Brevard Allyship. This message, again, is not just from the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. It is from a wide group of allies, and I suspect it is a group that will continue to grow to make our community better. Now, this opens the door for all of us to participate in this conversation. We have about 18 minutes or so to proceed with questions and answers. And for those of you that would like to participate, please raise your hand. I know that there is a button that's here. Daniel, can you help me identify where that button is?
It's either under your participants or your chat. I don't have access to that right now. Wherever there should be a raise hand. It comes in sequence, so those first come, first serve, and we'll be able to take you off mute.
I know that Alton Edmond asked if he could be recognized. So I don't know if you can find him and recognize him, Alton Edmond. I know that button is hiding in there. Oh, he left. We missed him.
I think he had to go.
Well, do we have our first question yet? And by the way,
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Doing this, I encourage our panelists to speak up, even if another person answers the question. If you've got something you would like to add to the conversation, please, all of our 5 speakers, please go ahead.
First question is from Guitar Check. Take you off mute.
And by the way, I just saw that if you hit more, M-O-R-E, the 3 little buttons that say more, that'll open up a little thingy where you can raise your hand.
There we go. Claudia's off mute. Go ahead.
Yes, I am. Thank you. This is Claudia Thomas, aka Guitar Chick, and I'm watching Alton on another screen right now. He did have to jump off to another video, so not so much a question, but a comment and a huge shout out to all of the speakers. I love you all, in the words of I won't go back that far, I'm old. Shy, Daphne, the doctor, all of you. I would love to have Daphne working for Florida today, man. She could rock there. Anyway, I think that everybody who is here is probably here because at least we'd like to think that we do the right thing as much as we can. And to me, those of us who really want to make a difference, everything you're saying is not necessarily new, but more of an emphasis to people who do care, I think. And I think what we in the white community need to do is to be comfortable making other people uncomfortable. Because when I have conversations and I'm passionate, I can tell there's a turnoff happening pretty quickly. And I think it's up to me to keep pushing, to keep that discomfort until they actually shut the hell up and start to listen. You know what I'm saying? So that, I feel like, is a role that I will continue to play, even if it hurts me or it makes me feel like I need to take a step back. I'm not taking that step back. And like I've been pushing until people are sick of hearing about Greg Edwards, and I don't care because I'm going to keep pushing about it. And I hope that every one of you continue to come and speak to groups like this. Kyla, you rock. You are my rock. I don't even know you, but I want to know you, girl. I love you too. I've already been on your Facebook page checking you out, so I'm going to borrow that sign you put out there about all the languages everybody else learns. We learned your Dutch, we learned your French, we learned your Spanish.
That's actually a sign from Milan, and that's part of my poetry at the top. Those posters are for sale on my website. Signed. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, we
that was the end of my comment anyway.
Yeah, we tried to keep them to questions if we can.
Oh,
No, that's okay.
I'm shutting up
Claudia.
anyway.
Thank you, Claudia. We really appreciate that, and I
Peace
love her
out.
enthusiasm.
We have
It's so
another
awesome.
question from Izzy Bryant. Izzy?
Can everyone hear me?
Izzy, we've got you.
Fantastic. As mentioned, my name is Izzy Bryant. I'm a resident of Palm Bay, Florida. I actually own a photography business out here. Also Black. So I actually have a question for all of the speakers. Any one of you can answer if you think you can. One of the things that I have had difficulty with in engaging in some of these difficult questions is actually other people of color. There's a section of our people of whom are massively distrustful of people of color, especially when they present as allies. I get it. Believe me, I do. However, I don't think that we can really work toward unity until we have everybody on board. What suggestions do you have in order to bridge that gap?
May I take a shot at it?
Yeah, Rick, go for it.
My experience in activism, whether through the church or politics or labor, has been to get into the community early and often and stay there, because the credibility has to be earned. It takes a while to build the trust, especially when you come from a community that's been mistreated, lied to, you've had so many things happen to you for so long, it's difficult. When you find an ally that's good, you want to kind of hang in there with that person and bring others into the fold and understand that it's not going to be easy at first, because we've been dealing with these problems for literally hundreds of years. So they just can't be frustrated. Just have to kind of dig into it as much as possible, try to understand where people are coming from and why they feel the way they do, and not take it personal, and just continue to be open to learn. I think that's some of the best advice I can give to that point.
Do any of our other speakers want to address that?
I'll just address it briefly if I can, Phil.
Yes, ma'am.
I think, Izzy, I would suggest that the same patience and kindness and compassion that you would give to a white person who was maybe not as educated about the Black struggle but trying to learn, is the same compassion I think we should give to, people, Black people or other people of color who, because really it's about pain, and it's because of the pain that they've experienced, or just to echo what Rick said, it's because of the pain that they've experienced that they're distrustful, and that they're what I think happens a lot of times is someone who's trying to be an ally will be then on the receiving end of the pain that people have received before from people who weren't willing to listen. Or, and I think it's okay for, even as people of color to kind of look at people who are coming in our space and examine if they're there for the right reasons. Because I think the history of Black people, not just in America, but all parts of what I call the diaspora, have been experiences where, and I say we, the generations that came before us, let, white people into our space only to be hurt because of it. So I think what you're seeing a lot of times is almost like a biological or sociological conditioning to, okay, listen, for hundreds of years, whenever I've trusted this group of people, they hurt me. So I'm scared. And so I think if we look at it and we deal with people with love and compassion, and give people patience and time, just like we give our our white brothers and sisters and colleagues time to learn and to sometimes to unlearn certain behaviors, I think we have to afford that same grace to our Black brothers and sisters as well. That's what I'd say.
Beautiful. Patience, love, walk a mile in the other man's shoes. I tell you what, those are lessons to learn. Daniel, I know we've got several more people that are waiting, right?
Right. We have David, who is next. David, I'm going to take you.
I wanted to chime in on that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go
it's
ahead.
all good. I'm getting into the night. I'll be brief. Izzy, I would like to say, I think what has helped me is that I operate in a space of fear, not to the true sense of the word, but fear to me is finding every available resource. And I'm always at the foundation level of everything that I do. I'm not in a space of expectation, because I think when you expect people to behave maybe like you would want them to, you're going to be hurt by it. So if you can open yourself up and be in a more accepting space of acceptance for whatever that person is going to show you, because they're going to show you their true selves. And once they tell you the truth, you believe it and you nurture it either way, or you let it go either way. And that's all I have to offer.
Thank you, Shai. By the way, we are down to just about 2 minutes to go. So I have one last question, I think.
From David Clinscales. David?
David, you're up.
Yes, good evening. This is Alberta Clinscales.
Alberta, yay.
Hey, Phil, and David is here as well. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm so proud, and we are so proud to be members of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, because you all for years have been a part of the struggle and for justice. And so we appreciate you. And I just wanted to say thank you for the speakers and all that they have shared. And for what Kayla said, Kayla Lacey, I wanted to say thank you to her, because she brought up the issue of reparations. And it is important, because a lot of what we see in our communities has to do with poverty. As we know, poverty breeds crime. And so you have organizations that are in the community who have infrastructure projects, who have programs that need to become best practices. We need evaluators to solidify some of the programs that we are doing. And personally, I've been doing programs for over 30 years. And, we have a viable project, but no money, no access to capital. And so it's important that we talk about reparations, or talk about some kind of reparative process, so that we are able to build our communities. These brothers and sisters hanging on the corner, a lot of times they out there because they want to make money. And so we're doing programs that address those issues, teaching entrepreneurship, teaching personal financial management. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, but we really need access to capital to get a lot of our infrastructure projects off the ground, because some of them are community-wide economic stability programs. And so I just want to say thank you, Phil. We love you, and we love the organization. And I hope that we can pay more attention to that topic of reparative justice. Thank you.
Alberta, we are so proud to have you as a member. We have about 45 seconds remaining before we have to shut off here tonight. So I don't know if anybody on our panel can handle that in, say, 15 or 20 seconds. Do you have anybody that you can close with what Alberta just said? But you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take it. And Daniel, I'm not sure if there's a way to extend this, but I think it's time for us to wind down. Our official end is at 8 o'clock, and so we've got to do this. But I want to say thank you to Dr. Leonard Ross, Rick Hoye, Shai Morris, Daphne Duret, Kyla Janae Lacey, fantastic speakers. Thanks to our audience. Thanks to everyone who participated tonight. This was a magnificent night. If we could all stand up and give you a standing ovation, we would do it. I'm telling you, this was a wonderful night. The conversation must not end here. If we want to change the world, we have to spread the word, learn as much as we can, and Tell our friends and neighbors what we've seen. Please come to our website. It's scpaflorida.com. Please check us out. Take a good look. Join us if you can. We love you all. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and make a difference and make the world a better place. Thanks to all of you.
Jump in just for a second, because I believe that Daphne wanted to post something. So the chat is open to anyone that wants to post anything now. So we'll leave that open for a couple of minutes as people are signing off. Sorry about that, Phil.
Not at all. It's wonderful to have all of you. Again, thank you so much. I wish we had an hour or more that we could continue to talk. Unfortunately, the clock is our master tonight. Have a beautiful night, everyone. Thank you.